Hey y'all, welcome back to Bourbon and Bones. This is now our 5th episode. We're really excited about doing this, and so thank you for coming back if you're returning, and if you're brand new with us, thank you for joining us. Like and subscribe below, comment, tell us what you're doing, what we're doing well, what you see behind me that you want us to get into. Always really excited to hear from you all. So tonight we're going to talk about 4 things in particular. So we're going to talk about the father of bourbon. We're going to talk about barrel proofing. We're going to talk about the demand for bourbon and the early history of bourbon in Kentucky. And so tonight we're going to be talking about Elijah Craig. So Elijah Craig is a Heaven Hill product, and they claim that he was the father of bourbon, that he was the first to char a barrel, that he was the first distiller in Kentucky. And the earliest written claims about Elijah Craig charring the first barrel, being dubbed the father of bourbon, dates back to Prohibition time. So in Anti-Volstead Act propaganda, they talked about that American whiskey is as American as apple pie, and that taking that away from Americans will somehow take away part of America from them. And so a lot of these stories kind of were canonized, so to speak, during pre-Prohibition and Prohibition times. So, and now there's a lot of conversation about who is the true father of bourbon. To be fair, there are very few out there that actually could rival Elijah Craig, one being Evan Williams, and here's a link to an Evan Williams episode we did. It's my first one. Be nice, I know, it's my first one. And also there's about a dozen other small distillers from that time period that could have been the first to char barrels and that kind of thing. It's really just kind of lost to history. It's kind of the frustrating and wonderful part about bourbon is that it's always a continuing exploration into where it began. So we're going to dig into those claims and perhaps finding out who the first distiller was is a little bit academic, Written records in the 1700s are a bit dodgy at best. And so perhaps we should realize that bourbon isn't just the brainchild of just one person. It was a group of people. It was dozens of men who had a passion for making great whiskey. And they shared ideas and recipes and failures and successes with each other. And that perhaps the new land of Kentucky was just part of a culture of sharing. And it's something that really resounds even to today. And it's such a great legacy to leave behind. But bourbon is more than great whiskey or history. It is about stories. And as a Southerner, we love stories. We love good stories. We love them told well. And the story of bourbon is filled with larger-than-life people, with larger-than-life fairy tales that made bourbon our national spirit. And of course tonight, let's talk a little bit about Elijah Craig. Elijah Craig was a real man. In fact, he was a Welsh immigrant, or he was the first generation American of a Welsh immigrant. No one really knows. There's a lot of unknown early bourbon. But he was a real man. He was actually a Baptist preacher. If you know anything about the Baptists, they do not drink at all, so there's a little bit of irony there. He was in Kentucky from the late 1700s to the early 1800s, and he was a true Renaissance man. He was an educator, he was a preacher, he was a road builder, a land spectator. He built the first paper and wood mills in Georgetown, Kentucky. Oh yeah, and he was also a really gifted distiller. So Elijah Craig started charring barrels because he was taking sugar out of barrels and selling that, and they charred the barrels, and he was putting whiskey into that and aging it that way. Or they used to char some barrels and they would transport fish in them. Or my favorite story is that in his paper mill, paper was carried, it was being held in some barrels, and there was a fire at the paper mill, and it charred, and it burnt up all the paper in the barrels, and it actually charred the inside of the barrels. And charred barrels and crisp white paper don't really go well together. And so, being a man of great resource, he decided to throw some whiskey into it and see what happened. So after allowing the whiskey to sit in there for a little while, he pours it out and realizes, hey, there's something really great about this flavor. And so that really started the charred barrels being used. And so everyone at that point, it just took off, and everybody was using charred barrels. And so even today, that has become law. So that is actually part of the law of bourbon, 51% corn, brand new charred white oak barrels, and they have to be in there. So that's my favorite story of how charred barrels were used. And that's the one that's actually told at Elijah Craig and Heaven Hill Distillery. And it's a great story. It is as great as any of the other ones out there, but it's personally my favorite. So if you disagree with me, it's my favorite, so you're wrong. Now let's leave the past a bit and talk more about the modern demand for bourbon. So Elijah Craig was released by Heaven Hill in 1986. And the bourbon at that time came with an age statement of 12 years. My bottle here is actually a 12-year-old, which is kind of cool. But an age statement means that on the label, on the front label, it says how old the juice inside is. It's a statement of age. Kind of simple. But, however, with the demand of bourbon in 2016, the age statement was dropped from Elijah Craig. And they also had a nice bottle change. Here's the old bottle here. I think it's quite the improvement. And now the small batch regular bourbon is a blend of 8 to 12-year-olds. So you're getting the same kind of profile, but they're all not, everything in it is not as old as it originally was. And per the Kentucky Distillers Association, the bourbon demand has jumped up 115% in the last 5 years. To give you an idea, they were expecting like an 8 to 10% growth. So, way outstripping their previous expectations. So, why don't they make more? I hear people online cry. And the problem with and the joy of bourbon are the same thing. It's time. It takes time. It takes time to age it. It takes time for it to sit in a barrel and slowly go through the seasons in Kentucky and draw out beautiful flavors from the wood, from the barrels themselves. And that just takes forever. And so to meet the demand, they started blending bourbon. This is very, very common throughout all of bourbon industry right now. So they must have time to age. And Elijah Craig, not alone, but nearly every bourbon on the market has dropped their age statements, except for some of their premium brands. Like Eagle Rare still is a 10-year-old, but it's a premium brand, so it's going to keep that. But any standard or flagship bourbon have all lost their age statements across the board. So let's look at the bottle a little bit. So, it says small batch here. Small batch means it's 50 to 200 barrels have been blended together for a really specific profile. Now, our bottle here is not blended because it is single barrel, aged 12 years. And the next thing down is actually 1789. So in 1789, George Washington was elected president. The Constitution came into effect, and Elijah Craig began distilling bourbon commercially. Again, since this is a barrel-proof single barrel. Now there are barrel proofs out there that are blends of barrel-proof bourbon, so they're not single barrels. This one is a single barrel, and that is important for just distinction, I guess, and differentiation. So, and we'll talk more about some blended barrel proofs later. I've got a few of them back there. So a barrel proof means they basically just took a barrel, rolled it over, knocked the bung out, and poured it into a bottle. And so it's a very high proof bourbon. So the label down here is really important. So it says that the proof on it is 136.6 proof. It is 68.3% alcohol by volume. To give you an idea, 100% alcohol by volume is pure alcohol, has no water in it, and it's practically a really high proof vodka. And it has no flavor. When you distill it that often, that far, to remove all water from it, it has no flavor profile whatsoever. So no matter what you made it with, it doesn't taste like anything. And that's why bourbon is, while this is a high proof, it will never get too high because it will lose flavor. And so that's an important distinction about alcohol and the alcohol by volume. So the next one here is the batch number. So it's A120, which might sound confusing, but there are actually only 4 releases of this type of bourbon a year: A, B, C, and D. So we know A is the first one. We know the 1 there is for January, and the 20 is the year it was bottled. So this was the first batch in January of 2020. Now we've gone over the history, the legend, the label. Let's go ahead and dig into the bourbon itself. So, as always, we're going to start neat here. So a swirl to wake it up. So the first sip, sometimes you can, not sip, but first scent you get sometimes is just ethanol. It's just alcohol flavor because it's such a high proof. So it's good just to kind of swirl it a little bit more, smell through it again, and you get some higher rye spices, and it's very caramely. So you get a lot of oak and a lot of leather, which isn't surprising because there's no water to pour any of that off of. And with the barrel proof, sometimes it might take 2 or 3 sips before you really get any kind of flavor profile. Like, I kind of prepped my palate before this with something a little higher proof, but even the first sip for me is overwhelming. It's a really intense cinnamon, and then it's ethanol. And so it's going to take 2 or 3 sips to kind of chew and through it to get all the flavor profile. So as you get into it, you get these beautiful baking spices, this powerful vanilla. Like, I taste like big red gum chewing bubble gum, like that cinnamon hot gum. But it does last more than 5 seconds in flavor, I promise. You get kind of this raisiny, nuttiness as well. And it's a long finish. It really just sits on the tongue, and it really dries out a little bit and kind of briny. And that's that oakiness that you're getting from the age and the barrel proofing. But it still has like a lot of nuttiness on it. It's a beautiful, beautiful bourbon. But all right, so like always, we're going to take a quick 10-minute break and transition into with a little bit of water. Welcome back. So it's been about 10 minutes in YouTube land, and we're going to jump right back into a second tasting. And so I've added a little bit of water to this, and so by my back of the napkin math, it's about 115 proof. So Still a high alcohol bourbon, but it has really cut this down by about 15%. So color is about the same, I think. Yeah, I think it's almost exactly the same. And you can really smell right away. Almost all that ethanol is just been cut off. You just get spices and oak and not as much leather, but still a lot of caramel and a little bit of vanilla, which I wasn't smelling before. And so with a little bit of water, it makes it a lot easier to sip through. But you still get like this long finish, but on the taste you get like vanilla bean and chocolate this time. And you're still getting some kind of like a raisiness, plenty of cinnamon. So you even get a little bit of chestnuttiness with it. It's kind of shifted from kind of a nutty flavor into something a little bit more specific. Same great finish, really just lingers on the palate. It's fantastic bourbon, really, really great. Again, we will be coming to our final transition, and that is, of course, always to the bone of the bourbon and bones. Tonight we're actually going to talk about a Carboniferous period. And so that spanned from about 300 to 350 million years ago. During this time, seed-based ferns ruled the world. Sharks evolved and they are just striking out into the oceans. The first egg-laying vertebrates evolved. The world is new and is nearly all ocean. It's hot. The ice caps are virtually gone. Pangea, all the continents are attached together, and they're mainly below water. And so that is actually kind of divvied up in the Western Hemisphere into the Mississippian and the Pennsylvanian time period. It kind of splits the Carboniferous period in half. You don't see that in the Eastern Hemisphere at all. They kind of blend together, but the Western Hemisphere has very distinct lines. And so with that, we'll be focusing specifically on the Mississippian, which is the oldest part of the Carboniferous period, about 325 to 350 million years ago. And so tonight, we're going to be talking about this specimen right here. Now, the name is very large, and please forgive me, but I'm going to put it right here in front of us. This is Torquaresidiskis-Kypsi. It's a huge mouthful, and we will break it down a little bit, I promise. This is an Edroastroidea, a now extinct class of animal, and they were domed. They were filter feeders, and had a mouth right in the center, in the middle of the body. So they would attach themselves to rocks, to larger, slow-moving animals, like you would see barnacles on a whale often. Same kind of idea, different family, but similar idea. And they had a rock-hard surface as well. So as you can see here, around the body there are these swirling arm-looking things, and they formed hard shells. And they belong to a larger family of animals called echinoderms. These include sand dollars and sea urchins, and this is a picture here of the holotype. And a holotype means that this is the first fossil discovered of this new animal. So if you're ever in a museum and you see a fossil on a wall, and it says holotype next to it. It means that this is the first of its kind ever discovered. It doesn't mean it's always the best version. It does mean it was the first. And it's the first one to say, hey, this is something new, this is something different. And so this is the, like I showed before, that was the holotype. And here are a few other pictures of really great examples of them. And this particular one is actually probably one of the very few discovered that's actually in private collection. So I was digging on the side of a road cut in Kentucky with the Kentucky Paleontological Society. And the Kentucky Paleontological Society is a group I've been a part of off and on for many years. When I was a preteen and a young boy, I was a member and went on several digs with them. And then when I came back to the University of Kentucky, I joined up again for a few years. When I was a young boy and I was actually out there digging, I fell in love with field research. And for me, that's where I really changed what I wanted to do with paleontology. It wasn't just I wanted to discover about dinosaurs. It turned into I wanted to discover dinosaurs. I wanted to be in the field. And so all over the country, there are societies that you can join. And in Lexington, the Kentucky Paleontological Society was founded by Dan Phelps, a very good friend of mine and president and founder of the Kentucky Paleontological Society. The KYPS is one of the most respected amateur paleontological groups in the nation. And they're not all scientists, not all professional scientists. Dan Phelps is, and there are a few others, but most everyone in the society are just people who love fossils, love rocks, love to get out there every so often and see what the ground holds for us. So if you love paleontology, start digging around online, and there are highly respected groups out there that want to teach people. You don't have to know everything about your local area or paleontology in general. Just go there, be willing to learn, willing to listen, and they will be more than happy to talk and to explain and to explore the world around you. Most groups have about once a month outing that actually where you to go out there, and you don't even have to have a lot for that. Here's a picture of my pickaxe and bucket, and these are my two main tools when I go out and start to dig for new specimens. The last thing I want to say about this fossil is the very last part of the name, KYPSI. And that stands for Kentucky Paleontological Society, and it ends in an I because it makes it for the Latin version. And this is a really small fossil. It doesn't mean a lot to a lot of people because it's 350 million years old, and it's this little filter feeder barnacle looking thing. But for me and for the Kentucky Paleontological Society, it's an amazing thing because a group of amateur paleontologists discovered something that no one had ever seen before, and they donated to the Cincinnati Museum of History, and there forever will be in the annals of history because they discovered something no one else had ever found. And you could be part of those kind of groups. If you love paleontology, you have to get out there and explore. So with that said, just like great bourbon, there is great science to be discovered out there. And I want to thank you all for joining me again tonight here at Bourbon and Bones. And if you like what you're seeing here, and you like what we're doing, like us, share, and subscribe below, comment, tell us what we're doing, and like always, share a bourbon with someone.